Right now, you probably know exactly what time it is. You glance at your phone. A number appears. You trust it completely. But for most of human history, that number didn't exist. There was no clock. There was no calendar. And yet, somehow, your ancestors never missed a season. That should be impossible. Think about it. No watches, no apps, no little red numbers counting down to anything. So how did people know when to plant crops, when to migrate, when to gather, when to hide from winter? The answer is far stranger than you'd expect. Your ancestors didn't track time the way you do. They didn't need numbers at all. They read the world itself, like a giant, living clock. And the story of how they did it says something uncomfortable about how disconnected you've become from that same clock. Let's go back, not decades, not centuries, tens of thousands of years, to a world with no written language, no math, and definitely no invented hours or minutes. Early Homo sapiens lived in small mobile bands. Survival depended on prediction. When would the herds move? When would the rains come? When would the fruit ripen? Get it wrong and you starved. Get it right and you lived another season. So humans became obsessive observers of pattern. Not by choice, by necessity. The moon was the first great teacher, unlike the sun, which simply rises and sets in a repetitive blur. The moon visibly changes shape every night. It swells, it shrinks, it disappears, it returns. Anthropologist Alexander Marshak studied a 20,000-year-old bone fragment found in France, marked with a series of small, irregular notches. For years, archaeologists assumed the marks were decorative. Marshak proposed something different. He suggested the notches tracked the phases of the moon, night by night, across roughly 2.5 lunar cycles. If he was right, this wasn't art. It was a calendar. One of the oldest calendars ever discovered, carved by a hand that had no concept of writing. Why the moon? Because it's reliable, but not too reliable. A new moon to a new moon takes about 29.5 days. That's long enough to plan around, but distinct enough to count without needing numbers. You just needed eyes, patience, and memory. Full moon, new moon, full moon again. That rhythm became the earliest unit of time, longer than a single day. Some researchers argue this lunar counting may even be the root of humanity's very first calendars, long before anyone invented a written number system. But the moon alone couldn't tell you everything. It couldn't tell you when winter was coming. For that, humans turned to the sun, though not in the way you might expect. They weren't staring at a clock face. They were watching shadows. A stick planted upright in the ground casts a shadow that changes length and direction throughout the day and throughout the year. Shorter shadows in summer. Longer shadows in winter. Ancient observers across completely unconnected cultures, from early farming communities in the Fertile Crescent to structures built in the British Isles, discovered they could track the sun's position on the horizon at sunrise and sunset to mark the solstices, the two extreme points of the year. Stonehenge is the most famous example, but it wasn't unique. Structures like it exist across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, independently invented by cultures who had never met. That's the striking part. Humans on different continents with no contact arrived at the same solution. Watch where the sun rises on the horizon, mark the extremes, count the days between them. It's almost as if the sky itself was giving everyone the same instructions, and everyone eventually learned to read them. This is where things get genuinely strange. Your brain right now still carries fragments of this ancient timekeeping system, even though you never had to learn it the hard way. Researchers studying circadian biology, including work built on the foundational studies of scientists like Jürgen Aschoff, have shown that human bodies contain an internal clock, roughly tuned to a 24-hour cycle, regulated by light exposure. This clock doesn't just control when you feel sleepy. It regulates hormone release, body temperature, digestion, even mood. You inherited this system from ancestors whose survival depended on syncing their bodies to sunrise and sunset with total precision. There was no room for guessing, but here's the twist. Your circadian rhythm wasn't built for clocks. It was built for the sun, and when Ashoff ran experiments, placing human subjects in underground bunkers with no natural light and no clocks, something fascinating happened. Their internal rhythms didn't vanish, they drifted. Without the sun to anchor them, most subjects settled into a day slightly longer than 24 hours, sometimes 25, occasionally stretching further. Freed from artificial light and screens, the body reached for its own natural, less rigid rhythm. That's the ancient clock still running underneath your modern one. You just can't hear it anymore because streetlights and screens override it every single night. So if your body already tracks time on its own, why did ancient humans need calendars at all? Because surviving as an individual is different from surviving as a group. Anthropologist Robert Kelly, who has studied hunter-gatherer societies extensively, points out that coordinating a group, deciding when to move camp, when to hold ceremonies, when to meet with neighboring bands for trade or marriage, required a shared system everyone could agree on, not your body's internal rhythm, a public one, visible in the sky. Undeniable. The moon didn't lie to one person and tell the truth to another. Everyone saw the same crescent on the same night, from wherever they stood. This is the real function calendars served long before they became squares on a wall. They weren't about scheduling meetings. They were about survival through cooperation. A band that knew exactly when migratory herds would arrive could position themselves in advance. A band that mistimed it by even a week could go hungry for a season. Time wasn't abstract. It was food. It was safety. It was the difference between a full winter store and an empty one. As agriculture emerged, the pressure to formalize time only intensified. Farming demands precision in a way that hunting and gathering never quite did. Plant too early and frost kills the crop. Plant too late and the growing season runs out before harvest. Early agricultural societies in Mesopotamia and Egypt developed increasingly sophisticated solar and lunar calendars, some of which tracked the heliacal rising of specific stars, meaning the first time a star becomes visible again on the horizon just before sunrise, after a period of being hidden by the sun's glare. In ancient Egypt, the reappearance of the star Sirius on the horizon closely predicted the annual flooding of the Nile, arguably the single most important event of the entire agricultural year. Get that timing wrong and an entire civilization's food supply was at risk. Notice what's happening here. Time wasn't discovered as an abstract concept and then applied to farming and hunting. It was the other way around. Time was invented because life demanded it. Every notch, every stone alignment, every star pattern was a tool built out of necessity, refined generation after generation, long before anyone wrote down the word calendar. And this is where the modern mirror comes in. You live inside a world of imposed, artificial time. 9 a.m. meetings, midnight deadlines, alarms that don't care whether the sun has risen. You've outsourced almost all of your timekeeping to devices, and in doing so, you've lost the skill your ancestors spent tens of thousands of years developing. Most people today couldn't tell you the current moon is without checking a phone. Most people couldn't estimate the time of day within an hour just by glancing at the sky. That instinct hasn't disappeared from your biology. It's simply gone unused for so many generations that it's atrophied like a muscle nobody bothers to flex anymore. There's something almost unsettling about that. The same brain that once tracked lunar cycles, carved into bone, that once aligned entire monuments to a sunrise on a single day of the year, now struggles to function without a battery-powered reminder buzzing in its pocket. You are not less capable than your ancestors. You simply never had to develop the skill, because the skill was handed to you, digitized, standardized, and stripped of any connection to the actual sky above your head. Okay. So the next time you check the time, consider this. That number on your screen is an abstraction of something your ancestors read directly from the world around them, using nothing but patient, careful observation. They didn't need a clock because the sky was the clock, and everyone alive was fluent in reading it. Right now you probably know exactly what time it is, But maybe the real question isn't whether you know the time. It's whether you'd still know it if the screen went dark.